science. And I am on slides. So if you've been kind of like moving through the slides, as you guys know, if you, with Teams, it gives you the option to move through the slides yourself. But I'm starting on slide 12. And just so you know that if you have been moving the slides yourself, you are no longer in sync with my slides. So just kind of keep that in mind. But yes, so I am acting as your content expert today, as Becca said, and I will be talking about implementation science, or really it's systems level change through implementation science is really the way I kind of think about it. I do live over in the Office of Special Education, and I'm a state transformation specialist. That's like the big fancy word for what I do.
Shasta, is it on the top of my thing? It says take control. Is that what you're talking about, where we can move the slides ourselves and it won't impact your presentation, right?
I don't think it will, but you won't be in sync with me anymore. So I'll be talking about, go ahead.
I'm sorry. She's talking about a different feature. So take control at the very top. What that does is that takes control. You'll be taking control of Shasta's pointer.
Yeah, don't do that.
What she's referring to. That'd be fun though. What she's referring to, if you look at the bottom of your screen right now, it says 14 of 63. And she's on slide 14 of 63, and you are able to navigate forward and backward down at the bottom of the PowerPoint, and that will not affect her. It won't affect her. At the top, if you take control, it will affect her.
Thank you, Becca, for clarifying that. One thing, if you guys wanted to, I don't like talking about like what I do a whole lot, but if you wanted to learn a little bit more about the role of a state transformation specialist, you can actually go to our SysUp Active States Targeted Support webpage. And it's going to give you a little bit more information around our partnership with SysUp, which I will be talking about here in just a second, but it'll also kind of tell you a little bit more about our like what we were doing in Kentucky, the history of our SSIP and all of those kind of things. Again, you're welcome to go there and check that out. Today, what we're going to be learning, we've got a couple of three like targets and then some activities to follow up. We're going to be talking about the SSIP, which is the State Systemic Improvement Plan. Now, as I'm talking, don't confuse when I say SSIP and SysIP, okay? I know that is totally crazy, and with my little Appalachia accent, it's probably going to throw you guys for a real good loop, okay? But I'm going to say SSIP, and when I say SSIP, I'm talking about our State Systemic Improvement Plan. And in a second, I'm going to tell you what SysIP is, so you can hear that too. We're also going to be talking about just implementation science in general. Implementation science is huge and it's big. Don't worry, we're not going to go into all of it. I really wanted to just highlight some things that I think are really important and beneficial to DOS. And we'll be talking about those active implementation frameworks, which are sort of like the secret ingredients, except they're not secret, in implementation science. And like I said, we'll do a couple of activities afterwards, so you guys can kind of just like play around with it. So to get started, talking about the State Systemic Improvement Plan. So the SSIP is one of our 17 accountability measures to the Federal Office of Special Education, or OSIP. Just like districts, at the state, we have an annual kind of like a summative assessment, I guess, if you will, where we are required to demonstrate that we're doing what we need to do as a state to support our students with disabilities. And while the SSIP is one of 17 indicators, it is unique in the way that it really pushes on or is impacted by all of the other indicators. The SSIP is very comprehensive and ambitious. When I say comprehensive, we were looking at our progress measures the other day, and we have like over 20 different progress measures that go into this one indicator. One of those progress measures, and again, and a unique feature of the SSIP, is that it ensures stakeholder engagement at all levels. So we have progress measures all the way from students all the way up to the state. And then, finally, the SSIP really the whole heart of the SSIP is implementation science, or active implementation, to improve results for students with disabilities. And you'll hear more about that in a second too. And I did want to point out, so there is a link in the PowerPoint, and I've also included it in the resources at the end. If you're unfamiliar with the indicators, the indicators, just like we are held accountable to the federal government. You guys know districts are held accountable to the state, so to speak. Those are the same thing, right? So we are accountable on the same exact measures. If you're like, I'm not really clear about these indicators, I don't really understand them. We developed a APR guide, an SPP APR guide, and it really is our 17 indicators, like what it is, how it's measured, some tools and resources, and some frequently asked questions. We tried to keep it really simple, but it is out there, and we tried to make it really user friendly. Like from the table of contents, you can click on whichever one you want to look at. And so if you're like, oh, somebody was talking about indicator 8, I don't really understand indicator 8, you can go there, you can check it out, and just kind of learn a little bit about that. So each state, what's again unique about the SIP is that each state gets to choose their own SIP. So some other states have chosen graduation rates or MTSS or transition. In Kentucky, through data and infrastructure analysis back in 2014, the SIP, it was determined that the SIP was going to be focused on increasing the percentage of students with disabilities performing at or above proficient in middle school math, and specifically kind of like our measure for that is at the 8th grade level. We get this question all the time, why math? Well, this goal was determined because, again, through data analysis, we noticed that there was a pretty significant drop in performance at this level, at the 8th grade level. And we knew, we still know that, math is very cumulative. And so we focus at the elementary and middle school level to ensure that we provide the support as early as possible. And focusing on 8th grade, this can also support students being better supported, being ready for high school math. And as we know, high school math leads to that college and career readiness. This was just sort of like recently, affirmed, why we stick with math and why we, prioritize math. A couple of reasons. One, I had a conversation with somebody over in CTE, and she said, Shasta, so many times students with disabilities excel in these CTE classes. She said, but what happens is they get to these assessments at the end and they can't get industry certified because they can't pass the math part of the test. And so that's a big deal. I also recently learned that when you compare how much money is spent both federally and at the state level on reading versus math, it's mind-blowing, the difference between those two. There is a huge gap in how much money is spent on math. So the great thing about the SIP is it's completely free. So if a district and a region choose to participate to focus on getting these 8th grade, math scores up, this is a free thing. Like there's no charge for that, which is kind of cool. Also, as I mentioned earlier, the SIP has some direct and indirect connections to several other indicators. So just as one example, indicator 13 and 14 is about transition. Well, if students have a solid grasp on their math skills, they're more likely to be successful in their post-secondary goals. Another example, indicator 4 and 5, if students are provided with quality engaging instruction at the tier 1 level, then we can expect positive trends in LRE and less disruptive behavior that leads to suspensions. Before we hop into our learning, though, I'm inevitably going to say some things and be like, I don't know what that is, woman. So I want to give you just a couple of like front-loading key vocabulary. So first of all, you're going to hear me say transformation zone, or more likely TZ. So if you hear me say TZ, what I'm talking about, again, this is a very essential element to what we do in the SIP. And our TZ is a representative group of our regions, districts, and schools within Kentucky. Currently, we have 7 out of 9 of our CERTACs, our co-ops, if you will, participating. TZ, or transformation zone, is mutually selected. So unlike some things that happen in education, it is never forced. It is never required. It is completely optional. And both the district and the region have to mutually agree, like say, yes, we're willing and ready. And that's kind of how you become a part of the TZ. You're also going to hear me say implementation team, and I'm probably going to say sit, dit, or rit, or bit. And that's crazy, I know. So just so you know, if you hear something, a letter with an it at the end, what I'm talking about is our linked team structure. And again, that's our state, regional, district, and school/building teams. Again, like I said, the SIP has that linked teaming structure when we go all the way from students in the classroom all the way up to the state level. And so if you hear me say implementation team or SIT, I'm talking about our state team, or if you hear me say RIT, I'm talking about our regional team. I'm going to try not to do that, but if I do, I apologize. And just so you know, that's what I'm referencing. Just a little bit of background. So this is from our 2022 SIP. We're about to update our 2023 SIP. So, our 2022 SIP. So last year, like I said, we have 7 regions who are participating in the TZ work. We have 11 districts, 41 schools. We estimate that is roughly 379 teachers who are being impacted by this work and 6,000 students who are being impacted and benefiting from this work. You're also going to hear me say SISEP, right? I said that earlier, right? So SISEP and SIP. So I'm going to try to emphasize that SISEP. So SISEP, this work, the work that we do within our transformation zones and within implementation science would not be possible without our stellar friends and partners at SISEP and NERN. There are national TA partners in this work, and they partner with Kentucky and several other states to make implementation science attainable in education. So much of the great knowledge and skills and successes that we have here in Kentucky with implementation science is because of our partnership with these folks. So shout out to SIP. So let's get into it. Implementation science.
Before we do, Shasta, before we do, we've had a couple questions that I wanted to, one, Alex Reed. How is the state sharing the information about the free resource for math to school districts?
Great. So, a couple of different ways. One, again, we really partner with our CERTACs in our regions, and we rely heavily on them so that when they're having conversations with districts, they can say, "Oh, you want to improve your math outcomes? Let's talk about transformation zone work. Let's talk about active implementation." Another way, like at the Continuous Improvement Summit, you had a session. There's a lot of district leaders in that, and so we kind of talked about that. Has some really good engagement there, and also like we have a web page, and so I'll share that information. That you can go to the web page and you can learn all about it. It kind of talks about that work. And so those are just some of the ways where you can kind of like dip in and kind of see what this work is about and what are the pieces of this work, and see if it's, again, something that you're interested in. You're always welcome to reach out to me or to your local CERTAC. Alrighty, so implementation science, let's talk about this. So grade outcomes for students is easy, right? If we listen to what the media says, if teachers and school leaders have the right knowledge and they have the right skills, then we get great outcomes, right? And if we provide training with fancy speakers who cost lots of dollars and we learn some new skills at PLCs, then ta-da, right? All students, they're ready to go. They're on time with proficiency. They're ready on graduation day, right? Like that's how many people see education. But we know that is very wrong. With what we in education know is that it is much, much more complicated and complex than that. So let's look at what it's really like, what we know, right? So this is really what it looks like a little bit more in reality. So let's imagine that those little blue orbs represent our students, right? And so you see they're coming across the top of your screen. They come to us from different spaces and different places and different backgrounds. They bring all kinds of assets and strengths, and sometimes, right, they bring some challenges. At the bottom, you'll notice our little stick figure heroes, who to me represent the school district and the family, right? We have the same goal. We want kiddos who are ready to adult when it comes time for that. We want to help that student get from pre-K or kinder, wherever they enter, to graduation ready. And we want to take our little orb and package it all nice and neat in a cap and gown and launch it into the real world, knowing that they are ready to launch, or at least as ready as any 18-year-old can be. And now our previous formula says that if we give our schools the knowledge and the skills they need, then we will get this result. But again, we know it's much more complex and complicated. We know that there is an almost constant navigation of obstacles, barriers, and pitfalls and challenges day to day, week to week, month to month. And so let me just sort of like ask you, right? Just general conversation in the chat. So drop a few things in the chat. What do you kind of see as some of the obstacles that some of these little things here, right? These little mazes and drops and spins. What are some of those obstacles that our schools and our families face in getting our kiddos graduation ready? Just drop some things in the chat. What do you guys see as like some of these little barriers, these little spinny things? Okay. Yes. Great things coming through. Yes. Trauma, poverty, changing schools, parent support, knowledge of transition. Yes, attendance, staffing shortages, access, absolutely. We could go on and on, right? There are so many things that kind of get in our way of getting our kiddos from A to B. These are all great, guys. So to me, right, this is why we need implementation science. Implementation science seeks to systematically close the gap between what we know and what we do. Often referred to as the know-do gap, by identifying and addressing the barriers that show or halt the uptake of proven interventions and evidence-based practices. So the active implementation of implementation science focuses on the merging of taking what research says is proven and making it something that we can implement in our day-to-day ways of working and doing business. It systematically helps us go from letting it happen or hoping it happens to actually making great things happen in our schools. So why do DOS need to know about implementation science? I get this question a lot. Tell me what the impact is for special education, because on the surface, I think that sometimes there's confusion that the SIP is really like a tier 1 kind of thing, because again, we really do focus on math practices at that tier 1 level. But really it's much more complex than that. And we know this, right? We know that at least 80% of our students, I think the last data said like 78%, I'm not 100% sure, of our students with disabilities spend the majority of their day in gen ed, right? And so that we know that tier 1 is essential and critical to improving outcomes for students. And so specifically, why did DOS need to know about implementation science? This is you guys, right? So one, the role of a DOS is one of the toughest jobs there is. And I believe that 110%. I get the privilege and the opportunity to meet with, talk with, chat with those, work with those on a routine basis, almost daily basis. And it is hands down, in my opinion, one of the toughest jobs there is in the education system. DOS have to make challenging leadership decisions every single day. DOS need a solid team of partners, right? Like a really good team of partners at every level to help them support their students. DOS make sure that their teachers and their staff have the skills that they need to be successful. DOS ensure that their students are making progress and are graduation ready. And in some way, in some different aspect, active implementation helps with all of that. So let's talk about the implementation science formula for success. It's like a bunch of little things. I'm going to click all of this so you can see it all at one space here. So implementation science gives us a formula or a recipe, if you will, for success. Implementation science says that if we follow this formula or this recipe, we are significantly more likely to get the results that we want. We're going to get those educationally significant outcomes. So not just like we see some improvement, but if you follow this formula, it's going to be educationally significantly improved outcomes. Implementation science says that there are 3 key ingredients called the active implementation frameworks. I'm probably going to interchange the word implementation science and active implementation throughout this presentation. They're not exactly the same, but hopefully you can hopefully I don't confuse you guys too bad with that. AI is, again, sort of those frameworks that are behind that and some of those specific techniques that are necessary for this recipe to come out like we want it to. Active implementation says that if we leave out a key ingredient, we're probably not going to get the outcome we want. You know, it's either going to be too salty, too spicy, or too sweet. And so we don't want that, right? We want our recipe to come out just right. I'm going to give you guys some information and some tools about each of these frameworks, but we're not going to go real deep because it would take days and days and days to go real deep into this. So I'm just going to highlight some sort of high level things and things that I feel like are applicable to you as a dose. We're going to start with that enabling context piece. And so we're going to look specifically within the enabling context at the teams structure. So let me give you a little bit of information just about when I say teams and how implementation science helps with building those solid teams. And if you remember, you know, we said that a dose needs a solid team of partners at all levels. You guys know that. You don't just work with your district or your school. You need people regionally and at the state, right, as well. So in active implementation, a team is a non-negotiable as part of this work. We sort of have 2 realms of teams, implementation teams and linked teams. So your implementation teams, that is your sort of like internal team. You're going to have very specific knowledge, skills, and abilities to oversee what you're accountable for. This is that implementation team focuses on developing and sustaining capacity to ensure that your identified student, staff, and family outcomes are achieved. And they're going to work again in transformation zones. And again, you've got the state, regional, and district, and you can kind of see how that's structured there. And then you have your linked teaming. So what happens within transformation zones is, let's say that a need, a barrier, an obstacle is identified within your building, right? And so we're with the A building. The building team gets together and says, we've tried to work this out. We can't. We need support from the district. District team, again, very specific roles and responsibilities and knowledge, gets together and says, okay, we've got this. It's happening in 3 other schools. This is a big problem. We can't solve it at the district level. Let's lift that up to the state level. And so we have a SIP team. And so they lift it up to their regional team. Regional team they come across and say, we can't solve it. We can't figure it out. Let's lift that up to the state team. And so the state team brings those things to the state. We get together about anywhere from like 3 to 5 times a year and say, what are we seeing across our regions and our districts, or barriers and obstacles that we're seeing? How can we support our students all the way down to that school level? And so that's kind of how that linked teaming structure works. Yeah, Mike.
Who's in those regional teams? Who comprises those?
So our regional teams, again, all of this is mutual selection, right? So a regional team will say, we want to be a part of this work. The regional team, there's like a selection process. That's part of what happens in TZs. Usually there's a math content expert on that team. There's usually a special education expert on that team. There's usually, again, sort of depending on the goals of the region. On some of our teams, we have, behavior specialists. The director of the region is always sort of like a part of that team. So it just kind of varies as to who that is and who might make that up. Really, it's very dependent upon the goals of the region, so to speak. But math and special education content specialists are always part of that team, and the director is always part of that team as well.
Thanks.
Good question. Alrighty, so exploring our usable innovation. When I first became an STS, this was the word that I was like, what the heck is a usable innovation? So hopefully I can explain it to you guys in a way that makes sense. So a usable innovation, and if I say UI, I apologize. That's what I'm saying is a usable innovation. So remember when we said that DOS, you guys are responsible for ensuring that students are making progress, right? You have to make sure that they're meeting both KSA goals and benchmark goals and IEP goals, right? Like all of that sort of falls on your all shoulders. And so with a team, of course, never alone, but with your team. In some ways, this is where the usable innovation enters the stage. Note that there is a difference between an innovation and a usable innovation. So an innovation in its own, what I mean when I say innovation, it's just the district's or the school's practice or program that they're implementing, right? So an example might be like PBIS or reading rhinos or math muscles, right? It's whatever the district has chosen to implement to address a certain area. Now the difference is a usable innovation is a practice or program that you plan to implement and because you've done lots of work in the background, that it's teachable, it's learnable, it's doable, and it's measurable. This is really, really important to making sure that our evidence-based practices end up doing what we hope they're going to do. So we provide some tools and some resources. I'm going to talk about those in a second. But first, I know this doesn't happen in Kentucky, right? It doesn't happen, but I've heard that in other states, there are districts that spend a lot of money on a new program or a new practice, and then to discover a year later or two that it wasn't as great as they thought it was going to be. It doesn't meet the needs of their students and their staff. Sometimes, I know this happens too, that the program or practice actually is great. Like this thing that we developed, oh my God, we were on board. It was awesome. 2 years, it was awesome. And that's great data. But then the grant money goes away, or the leader who is in charge of that goes away. And all of the sudden, the program or the practice isn't sustained because the district or the school no longer has the capacity to support it. Well, this is where choosing a usable innovation, comes in. So choosing a usable innovation, we know that it's a process. It's more than just who had the best presentation with the most shiny free stuff. I remember when being in the district, I was on some sort of curriculum. We were choosing social studies curriculum or something like that. And we had like 5 people come in and say, you want to buy our stuff. Look, somebody gave us like for real, like they catered us all kinds of things. We got all kinds of free swag that came with that shiny new textbook. But when we really looked at it, we were like, this is not going to benefit us or support our students. Thanks for the free stuff. We appreciate that pasta, but it doesn't work for us. And we ended up choosing something different. But we do know that sometimes we're swayed by, the most dings, the most bells, the most whistles, those sorts of things. On the SysEP webpage, and again, even if you're not part of the TZ, you can still go here and access some of these resources. Like I want you to check them out. So on the SSIP webpage and on SysEP, there are tools that can be used to select an innovation to determine your fit and your feasibility based on the need and the resources available to support the innovation in your district. So one thing we have is the hexagon tool, and it sort of helps evaluate innovations and determine what gaps need to be addressed, right? So it says, we're going to look at Reading Rhinos. Reading Rhinos says it's going to offer this, this, and this, but according to our district need, we also need this, right? So it's going to help you evaluate that and say, based on what we see, is this worth our money and our time? And the initiative inventory, what it does, I love initiative inventories. I kind of geek out on them. They're very exciting. Is what it does is it says, we're going to look at all the initiatives available at our fingertips. So all of the things that are available in this school or this district, past and current programs, so we can really get a clear picture of what has been successful and what has not. With one of our regions, shout out to KVEC, they recently did this with the district to discover that within a district, they had over 20 something different reading initiatives over the last like 3 to 5 years or something like that. I hope I don't get that number wrong. It was a lot. So they had a lot of reading initiatives. It's been a lot of money to discover that they had tried all of these things and really only 2 or 3 of them we're benefiting the district and the students. And so that's kind of where an initiative inventory and a hexagon tool come in. They help you make those decisions around what you have, what you don't have, and then what you need next. And again, those are totally free. I would highly suggest that you reach out to your CERTAC because they're going to be able to help you work through these sorts of things. You won't feel like, wait, I don't know how to do this. Our CERTACs are really great at this. As part of our SIP, we developed a usable innovation support for math, right? So again, math is our focus for the SIP, or let me say it's how we measure our progress. Let me say that. So the usable innovation support, the Kentucky Math Toolkit, it can be used to support the implementation of any math innovation. So let's say you're using Math Muscles in your district, right? You've decided Math Muscles is the best, it's great. And now you just need some way to sort of determine how you can support your teachers in delivering that innovation, delivering that program or that practice. So the Math Toolkit includes resources to both identify and measure effective math instruction in the classroom. It is not evaluative. Let me say this a bajillion times. The Math Toolkit and the KMIT, they're observation tools. They're based on the 8 math teaching practices, highly researched, evidence-based practices for math. And it gives you like these 8 sort of standards, and it gives you an observation tool. And that observation tool says, here are 8 things I should be looking for in math instruction. But let me say this, it is imperative that you hear this. It is never and should never be used as evaluative. It should always be used as like a training and coaching support. Very important. Talked a lot. I'm going to pause for just a second, take a drink. Does anybody have any questions so far?
If you do, feel free to unmute yourself and just speak up.
Okay, next thing. Let's look at the effective implementation and improvement. We're going to look at the drivers. We're not going to talk about stages or cycles today, just so you guys know, but we are going to get into drivers probably more than any of the other things because I think that they're going to impact your work as a DOS the most. So our implementation drivers, what the heck is that, Shasta? So implementation drivers are sort of like the standard features of a successful system of support. And again, you told you we work with NERN and SISIP. These people have done so much brain work for years and years and years behind the scenes to come up with this, again, this formula for success, right? And so what we have found is that with the implementation drivers, these are the standard features of success. They are the key components of capacity and infrastructure that influence the success of your program. There are 3 categories of implementation drivers. We have competency, which is focused on gaining and growing the knowledge and skills needed to use evidence-based practices or programs. We have organization. Organization is focused on using data to determine and identify and to communicate barriers while using that evidence-based practice or program. Then we have leadership. Leadership focuses on providing the right leadership strategies for different types of leadership challenges. Things like making decisions, providing guidance, supporting organizational functioning, those sorts of things. Each of these drivers are integrated and compensatory, right? Meaning that they all work together, right? They can't be seen in isolation because they all push on each other, and they have a huge impact on the fidelity and the success of your program. Fidelity, that's the consistent intended use of the program or practice. How many times have we attended a training, been a part of an initiative? We were all trained again in reading rhinos. It was great. It was awesome. But as a classroom teacher, we weren't supported with how to actually use it in the classroom. We weren't supported with how to use it for this student or that student. We weren't coached. And it's like, yeah, it's great, and it has all of this data. That's awesome. I don't know what to do with this data, right? I know that was a problem I ran into as a teacher. And so again, these drivers kind of make sure that doesn't happen. That makes sure that that really great, shiny, awesome program doesn't end up stuck on a shelf somewhere. Because we all know that happens too, right? So let's look at, start with those competency drivers. Let's take a quick look at those. Remember when we said that a DOS has to make sure that their teachers and their staff have the skills they need to be successful, right? You got to make sure that your teachers and your team, they have what they need to do their jobs. And this is where the competency drivers comes in. And since we're, thinking about those drivers, let's go a little bit deeper on the competency drivers, which are coaching, training, and selection. Okay, a little schema building here too, right? I know sometimes when you have all like new information or something that's kind of new, it's good to say, but what do I already have up here in my brain? We do this with our students, right? So again, before I became an STS, this was all sort of new to me. But what I did know about was John Hattie and his work, right? We've probably all heard about John Hattie. And so to me, again, in my pre-STS brain and now my now STS brain, is that there are several pieces of implementation science that are likely familiar to you, but you just kind of know it in a different name. You've seen it in a different package. Again, with Hattie, the visible learning, you've probably been trained on that even at some point, right? You've probably had like a PD or something on it. If so, you might know that the factor that has the highest effect size on student achievement is collective teacher efficacy, right? It has that 1.57 effect size, which is like astounding, right? That's amazing. Well, in my mental codification, the drivers are what create that collective teacher efficacy. Implementation science just breaks down collective teacher efficacy into these tangible bite-sized pieces that then you can say, am I providing and supporting collective teacher efficacy? How do I do that? What's my rubric for that? What's my model for that? Well, implementation science gives you through these drivers some things you can use to kind of think about that. So let's talk about selection. So your selection driver can be applied in a variety of different contexts. The perks to focusing on a selection driver is that it promotes the intentionality of selecting the right candidates for a job or team, etc. When using the selection driver, it reminds us to look for those tough to teach traits, right? Meaning those traits that you can't be trained. Things like creativity or just like an inner drive. We know those things can't be trained, but we need those in our teacher. We need compassion. We need staff who are compassionate. All of those kinds of things, and those can't really be trained. And that's what the selection driver does. Is it helps you decide for this job, for this role, what do we need this person to be able to do. If you need someone on your team or you need to hire someone that's a creative thinker, that might be something you look for in that selection process. A screener that they might have the right expertise or the right experience. They might set expectations for new hires so that everyone has a clear understanding of what this position entails. For a team, this would be laying out the deliverables for the team that need to be accomplished. One of the keys to selection is identifying those components ahead of time, writing out what those traits are, those prerequisite skills are, and work to be accomplished. If these things are taken into consideration, then it will improve the likelihood of both retention for that person that you've hired, and it's going to improve the likelihood or that the implementation of the practice of the job is actually done. Sorry. All right, training. We're all familiar with training, right? We've all had so many required hours of training, and sometimes we actually choose training, which is kind of cool. So this is something that since you're already kind of familiar with, I'm not going to talk about it a whole lot. Training is a piece of this. It's a purposeful, skill-based adult learning process. It gives you the background information you need, right, for a skill or concept. We know that training is sort of like the introductory to the thing that needs to be coached. It builds competency. It's that kind of getting started piece. We get started here. We're going to do this SDI training, and then we're going to do some additional follow-up trainings, coachings, and support so that we are doing great with SDI. And we do know, right, from research tells us this, and we know it, right? We've all been in the classroom. This is where we are, that training alone is not. to sustain and grow change over time. It's a really good way to get started, but it doesn't necessarily always lead to getting better. Here, this is coaching, right? Coaching, this is what we know, this is where our the most bang for our buck is. So coaching is one of the most important but often underused components of competency. Coaching is that regular embedded professional development that's designed to help teachers and staff use the program as intended, right? So again, we had this great initial training on reading rhinos. Coaching is what's going to help us make sure that it's implemented to fidelity. It is a necessary component for making sure that our teachers have the competence and the competence that they need to deliver that program or practice. To me, it's kind of like an environment embedded learning. That's what coaching is. It supports the development of judgment that we need to differentiate instruction, use for data decision making, engage in the program. It offers critical support for trying out new approaches during that awkward stage of how do I deliver this program. And it also makes sure that those sort of fragile, new, uncomfortable skills that we're developing get tried so that confidence can be built with that practice. Now, you probably know this from the way that I talked about it, but I'm just curious, in the chat, which of the competency drivers do you think leads to the biggest impact on use of practice? Selection, training, or coaching? A, B, or C? Oh, look how smart you guys are. Smartest group of students ever. You're correct. So according to a study that was done from Joyce and Showers, again, some of our SysUp Nerd friends are some of the brilliance behind that. If a training is conducted with theory and discussion, about 10% of those participants will experience a gain in knowledge. 10% is better than no percent. 5% will be able to actually demonstrate that skill, but it's 0% likely that it's going to actually occur in the classroom, especially over time. What promotes the most use in the classroom is coaching. This study really highlights the importance of coaching and providing that follow-up support. So as a dose, right, if you're thinking about, I'm delivering, information, we really got to improve, again, SDI, let's say SDI in our district. We've got this great training, our CERTAC and our district have worked together to develop this great training. It's going to be really important for you as a dose to think about, how do I continually support my teachers in that though, right? What does the coaching piece of that look like? Because that's really where you're going to see them move from knowing about SDI to really being able to implement SDI. Shift into our organization drivers. Our organization drivers are focused on, they're really data focused really, and they really focus on using data to identify and communicate barriers while using that practice or program. The organization drivers are made up of systems intervention, facilitative administration, and decision data support systems. Systems intervention is all about, again, identifying, revising, and eliminating those policies, those procedures, sometimes regulations that serve as barriers in this work. The purpose is to create and sustain an environment and the conditions that support an effective way of doing business. Systems intervention really promotes that lift up of systemic barriers so that teams can pull their knowledge and their recommendations to develop those collaborative approaches to identifying and addressing barriers. Essentially, systems intervention means that if there is a barrier that cannot be solved at your level, that it gets lifted up to the next level for support in solving that. As an example, if your school is really interested in purchasing a new practice or program, but unfortunately you don't have the funds for it, you could lift this up to the district level to see if supports could be provided to purchase that program. As another example, if a school has a question on a particular topic and they're not sure how to move that forward, they can lift that up to the district to support. And if the district's like, wow, that's a really great question, but we're not sure how to answer it either, they can then lift it up to their regional support. so on and so forth. So eventually, if it needs to be addressed at the state level, you have this systems intervention in place to make sure that that can happen. Facilitative administration, it's similar to systems intervention in that it's focused on removing barriers. The biggest difference is that these are the barriers that did not need to be elevated to a different level of the system. These are barriers that can be solved sort of within their own level. It's sort of wherever that barrier lives, that system, whether it be regional, district, school, kind of takes the lead in identifying and addressing that concern. It drives change within your direct sphere of influence. You guys know sometimes problems can be handled within your direct sphere of influence. You got your good team, you can figure that out. It creates an internally hospitable environment for the new way of work. And it looks for ways to make the direct work of your practitioners and your administrators more effective and less burdensome. And again, it really proactively solicits feedback so that things can be lifted up if needed. And then finally, decision support data systems. So the third driver is DSDS, right? Decision support data systems. It's really just a simple way of thinking about this. Is teams using data to make informed decisions, right? We're all familiar with that. Data can be qualitative or quantitative. For example, if your school or your district is implementing a literacy or a math initiative, you can look at classroom walkthrough data to determine whether the training and the coaching on that practice has even had an impact or not. You can also look at your student benchmark data. If you've seen a classroom walkthrough data, go up, that leads to changes in student benchmark data, right? So you can kind of think about how those things impact each other. Thinking through the lens of an ARC, right? ARC uses progress monitoring data all the time to determine whether SDI is made an impact on the IEP goals. So in a data support decision support data system, I'm trying not to say DSDS, I'm just going to let it happen. There's connections because the data is used to identify potential barriers and help solve those barriers. The facilitator is going to, or facilitative administration is going to help you solve those barriers. And it's really going to help you think about, again, what needs to be lifted up. All right. Ooh, I'm good with my time. So let me ask first, any questions? And again, let me say this too. If you're genuinely curious and you want to learn more, I'm really going to encourage you to go to one of two places. Go to our SISIP page. It's going to give you some links that connect directly to our SIP. Or actually go to SISIP's AI Hub. They have some really good videos, tutorials, tons of additional resources that you can use that link back to this. So if you're I'm really curious about this systems intervention piece, they have all kinds of really great videos, again, and modules and things that you can kind of go through to learn about that a little bit more and say, that's something I can do to improve, systems within my school. And again, reach out to your CERTAC. If especially if you're in a CERTAC region with one of our current active TZ CERTACs, oh my gosh, they're going to love to hear from you. They're going to love that you're contacting them to talk about this. So I encourage you to go there. Question. So if our CERTAC or district is not in a TZ, who do we advocate for this consideration? So give me a call. Right? We can talk about maybe what we can do without that CERTAC being involved. What are some tools and resources you could use? Or we could even facilitate some conversations with that CERTAC, with your district to say, hey, this is something that's really great. We think this could really benefit us. Can we have a conversation around that? So just if that's something you're really interested in, let me know and we can at least begin facilitating some conversations. All right, let's take a break. It is 11. This is a lot, so let's do a full 10-minute break. I feel like this is a lot of really heady material. So let's take a full 10. I will see you guys back at 11:10.
Raven.miller@education.ky.gov.
Okay. That helps me out. Then I will save my questions for her then.
Anytime.
All righty, friends, it is 10:10. Hopefully you were able to refill coffee or drink or stretch, whatever you needed to do. Mike, you had something you wanted to share before we got started?
Yeah, thanks so much. Hey, I just wanted to give everybody a little bit of thought in the context of what Shasta's saying here. When I was a new director, we didn't have these resources available to us, and there were two situations. This implementation science would have been extremely helpful to me. First example is I came on board, and my assistant superintendent curriculum coordinator said, "Hey, we're getting ready to implement a new reading program in the district. I wanted to make you aware of that. And if you all want to be a part of that, well, you all are going to be a part of that." And I said, "Great." But my special ed teachers basically were just kind of thrown into the training cycle with the general ed teachers. And yes, a lot of things applied, but a lot of things did not apply. We had some different dynamics. If we would have had this process and going through the active implementation cycle to really explore what this program was about and begin to kind of go through the installation stages and then start to implement it in a systematic way, that would have been so much more effective. So what I just said was, sounds great. Yes, we'll be a part of that training with you all. And so did it work out? Yes. Could have been much more effective. Totally. If we would have been able to use these implementation principles. The second thing that hit me was another example. We had a significant expulsion problem going on in one of my buildings with special ed students. And they asked me, said, "Hey, we need to really kind of look at this and start to deal with this more effectively." So what I did was begin to meet with the principal and talk with the lead teacher and my departmental chair, and kind of brainstorm some ideas. But I didn't do it at a systematic level that implementation science really breaks down here. It talks about coaching, looking at all the trigger points. And I sure didn't have at the CERTAC at the time a co-op level, a person that could really help join me and kind of talk through this. So I just kind of wanted to point out, this is a lot of information that we're sharing here, but I wanted to connect it to really two things that you guys will be faced with clearly as far as program implementation there at the local level. So thanks, Shasta. Just kind of wanted to connect a couple things.
No, I think that's really great, Mike, and I appreciate you sharing that, especially because you have that experience and expertise as a former DOS. And I would add to one thing, and I meant to mention this earlier. I don't know if I did or not. One of the questions we get about the SIP a lot is, well, what if we don't want to start with math? Because full transparency, that's where you start. If you want the support of implementation science from the state level, from us, from OSEAL, we start with math, and our CERTACs start with math. Here's why. One, I kind of explained to you guys earlier why we picked that as our target. It is very important. Again, we have lots of students who are not graduation ready because they can't do basic math. Okay, so it's a big deal for us. It's a big deal for our students. But let me say this, you start with math. Math is sort of like your on-ramp to this system. We start with math so that you can learn how to do all of this stuff in a very structured, very systematic way. But then what happens is as you progress through the stages, you'll see what's happening. We have it happening in GREC right now. We have it happening in Southeast, South Central right now. We have districts who have just mastered this process, this system, through the vehicle of math, to where now they're scaling out to other things. Now they're using these systems for reading. They're using these systems for behavior. They're using these systems for like school or district-wide, systems of support. So let me say that is like, if you're like, I have no interest in math whatsoever, then this might not be a good place for you to start, because that's where we start at, to make sure that teams understand how to do implementation science. But once you have it, you get to keep it forever. And these systems become in place so they can continue over time. So that if Principal A leaves, guess what? Because you now have a really great system and how to support, the implementation of these practices. It's okay. Your team, you have a whole team of people who knows what to do to make sure that they continue to improve outcomes for students. And so let me just kind of throw that out there as a caveat. All right, last things, implementation drivers. We're going to take a quick look at leadership. And so just a little bit, we talked earlier, we said that a DOS has to make challenging leadership decisions every single day. Mike just gave us some examples. I know you guys already know that. We have some DOS with us right now who are like, yeah, no kidding, Shasta. So this is where the leadership driver comes in. Leadership focuses on providing the right leadership strategies for different types of different leadership challenges, like making decisions and providing guidance, supporting organization and structure. Go. So in implementation science, leadership focuses on those leadership approaches, again, or those strategies related to transforming systems and creating sustainable change. The leadership driver helps us identify and understand the difference between technical and adaptive strategies and challenges. So in leadership, you're either going to have a technical problem or like we consider a tame problem, and adaptive are considered those more like wicked challenges. It's important to identify the type of challenge because then it helps you determine your approach for solving that challenge. So let's look at that a little bit deeper. So implementation science says technical challenges are those where you have a pretty clear understanding on agreement on the definition of the problem at hand. There's generally agreement on what the problem is by those who are impacted by it. Technical problems usually have a pretty clear pathway to a solution. Doesn't necessarily mean the solution is quick or easy, but you do know how to address it. The solution's fairly known. Technical challenges are usually manageable. The leader, can form a team, make a plan, and determine a solution. One example might be something like the need for a common planning. Teachers may identify that they need a common planning to use the evidence practice or program as intended. This would be considered a technical challenge because, one, even though it's complicated, right? It's not that it's easy to solve that problem. Even though it's complicated, scheduling can get really complex because we have to ensure that there's adequate staff to cover both, your tier 1 classes and staff to support your resource time. However, it is pretty well defined. We know what the issue is, and we know that it's scheduling, right? And so we can try to provide a variety of solutions and work. And if they don't work, then you just abandon them, try something different. So that's just one example. If something's not working, you just switch back. You try a different coverage schedule, right? We know when a solution is reached with a technical problem. We know when the solution has been reached and there has that the coverage for the schedule, has been fixed or solved. So some strategies to address technical challenges. How can we approach those technical challenges? How can you guys approach those technical challenges that you're going to face or that you have as a DOS? So with the technical challenge, it's pretty straightforward. You define the issue, which should be a little more concrete. You think of solutions. You weigh the costs and the benefits of each. You gather resources that are needed to address that barrier, and then you develop an action plan. And you assign someone to manage and monitor those tasks. So with scheduling, right? You might schedule for a common planning. The solution may be to rearrange schedules. Resources may be working with the guidance counselor or whoever who works with schedules to rearrange them. An action step may be that you meet with the counselor or whoever again makes the schedules to see if it's working. So our adaptive challenges are what we call our wicked challenges. An adaptive challenges is, we consider it wicked because they're very fluid and they might change in nature over time or pretty quickly. Usually our adaptive challenges are not easily defined and they can involve competing perspectives. An example of an adaptive challenge would be a team is struggling to work together and they have competing priorities or interests to work as a unified team. This could be considered ambiguous because we may not know the root cause of why the team isn't working well together. We don't know the root of why there's competing perspectives. Because the problem is ambiguous, it can make it very difficult to know where to even start to solve the problem. The solution might be to shift as the context changes, so that as teams' priorities change, the solution may have to be morphed or adapted. It means that these wicked problems are ones where it's never like officially solved. Like you feel like you can't officially put a check mark at the end, like done. It just kind of like continues on, and you have to address it over and over and over again. So some solutions or some strategies for those adaptive challenges. This comes out of our friends at SysEP and NERN. I have, giving you that information from that research at the bottom there. I highly encourage you to go there. But out of that research came some solutions for these adaptive challenges. So one is getting on the balcony, so to speak. It's kind of like where you step out of the fray to see if there are any key patterns and what the bigger picture is. Leaders need, to recognize these patterns of things such as like work avoidance or potential conflict in order to help solve that problem. Another strategy is identifying the adaptive challenge, which is, putting those unspoken issues on the table. It involves recognizing that these challenges, it may be uncomfortable changes that need to happen, there may be some shifts in thinking that are required, which we know is really hard for people sometimes. Regulating distress is another really important strategy for addressing these challenges. Creating a safe environment for challenges to be discussed is really important. I always think about it as like, I've had some really great leaders before who I have felt like have given me permission to voice concerns. Sometimes we have leaders that we don't feel like we have that permission from, but we have some who are like, yes, you have permission, and here's the space, a safe space to do it. So that's one of the strategies, is to make sure that you're creating that safe space for diverse opinions and experiences and values. Maintaining disciplined attention. So being aware of patterns of behavior that indicate that there is either a purposeful or unconscious attempt to avoid distributing or to avoid solving these issues. These patterns and behaviors might show up like scapegoating, blaming others, denying that the problem exists or it's even actually a problem, diverting attention by focusing on like technical issues instead of the real issue. Another strategy, so give the work world back. Oh, wow, my mouth struggles with that. So that means just creating those conditions that help people take greater responsibility for the work. Maybe it's helping them say, well, help me define the problem, help me solve the problem. The leader then supports, their people rather than directing or controlling them. It's more of like a partnership sort of approach. You give the work back to the people, so which requires instilling and expressing confidence. Says, hey, let's take some risks together. But then I'm also going to back you up when you make a mistake. Finally, another great strategy is protecting all voices. Relying on others to raise questions about these challenges. Provide support and protection for those who do identify these challenges. This might, this might be you, making sure that you're providing a real space for those who constructively disagree. Alrighty, so let's do a quick activity. I'm going to drop in the chat. I put this in our SharePoint folder for you guys. You'll need to access it because no matter what team you're in, you're gonna need this to kind of read through these scenarios. So before I move on, are there any questions or just thoughts, feedback, anything at this point? We're doing really good on time, so. Okay, so here's what you're going to do in your breakout rooms. There are 4 scenarios in that link. Depending on which room you go in. So like if you're like sent to breakout 1, then you're scenario 1. If you're breakout 2, you're going to do scenario 2, so on and so forth. You can kind of talk about that scenario as your team, work through that scenario with your team. At the end, we'll come back and just kind of share some general just sort of responses. There's no like right or wrong. This is really just for you guys to kind of think about how you might utilize implementation science in your day-to-day practices. There are links within those resources that might be helpful because you're like, wait, this is all kind of new, right? What did she say about that? Or where can I find information about that? I included some resources that'll help you facilitate that conversation in your thinking. And again, just make sure that as you're going into your room, make a mental note of which room you're going in, because then that's going to tell you which scenario to discuss. Okay. Any questions before Becca sorts us?
Oh no.
All
Okay,
right.
everyone should be back in the space, in our meeting space now.
Okay. All right. So just out of curiosity, let me hear from some of the folks in the teams. You had a couple of different scenarios. So just kind of share, like, I'm just curious, initial thoughts, initial feedback. I try to develop scenarios that I felt like you might deal with in a, as a dose. So if you want to share, just kind of give us a really brief, overview of what your scenario was about, and then just what your team talked about. Let's hear from somebody from scenario 1. Group 1, I guess.
I can share. Our scenario was choosing between 2 candidates, what selection criteria we would use to choose between 2 candidates for a special education teacher to co-teach in middle school to improve outcomes in math. One candidate had difficulty working with teams during trainings, but they did have experience in middle school math and felt comfortable with content. And then the other candidate was kind of the opposite. They worked well with other teachers, but had limited experience with math and identified as not a math person. Our discussion really kind of centered around which candidate would be more coachable. And it's often very difficult to coach that, those people skills. And that I think we were kind of unanimous in choosing candidate 2 because we would be able to coach and provide training for the math and for the instructional piece. And we didn't want to have, a situation where the other candidate could perhaps impact climate and culture, or, bring down a team, because oftentimes it's much more difficult to come back from that sort of scenario, rather than having a candidate that we could teach and coach and mold to try to help bring up math scores and math success.
So Alrighty, what about scenario 2 or group 2?
I can share for group 2. So for group 2, our scenario was about a principal in an elementary school that wanted to implement a new evidence-based program and wanted to hire a coach to support the implementation of that program, but didn't have the funding to do so. And so when we were talking about systems intervention and we had a question about facilitative administration, it all really centered around bringing stakeholders to the table to determine from a school perspective how people thought this new evidence-based program would be most successful in implementation. And since didn't have funding for coaching, we talked about working with district level or CERTAC, but really people in your school to determine a new plan for maybe how you could provide some of that coaching in-house without the coach. So for example, maybe you would want to implement the program with just select teachers from grade levels and get them trained up so that perhaps they could lead a cohort of teachers within the building and build capacity over time. So use your own staff to build capacity within your staff. developing a school-wide walkthrough tool, because I know oftentimes once you're in the classroom, you're working in a silo and you don't necessarily get to see people implementing programs at other grade levels or even at your own grade level. So giving teachers an opportunity to observe other teachers within your building. And so using that information to collect data to hopefully that solves your issue, you get good implementation and you see good results. But if you don't, then perhaps you could use that data to say, hey, we've utilized our own school resources to try to do our very best to develop this coaching system, and it was unsuccessful. So then maybe being able to go to the district to say, can we use this data as evidence to say we need something that's a little more advanced in our coaching, to hopefully maybe get funding to create that position.
Yeah, thanks, Harper. That's great. And something that you say, a couple of things actually, it's so cool that you kind of picked up on these things, because we've actually seen this happen within our TZs where, in some of our schools, they've started with a specific grade. Like year 1, we're going to focus on grade 4. And then in year 2, we're going to go from grade 4 to grade 5 or whatever. And then what happens is you're building this school-wide capacity to be able to implement this program in practice. And it's really great. And then also you kind of talked about that, that peer-to-peer like coaching model. And again, we see that a lot where you'll see the capacity is developed maybe again in year 1 or year 2. And then eventually you have these teachers who are able to support and coach with other teachers. And finally, you talked about, I love this part, taking, you've got this data that says, we've tried X, Y, and Z. We've tried all these different coaching models. We really need a coach. And you take that to the district level. One of our most successful CERTACs actually had that very thing happen. They, started engaging in this work. Over time, they had enough data to say, look, we really need coaches, district-wide coaches. And they got those coaches. And then what happened was they said, okay, we're going to start with 2. They started with 2 coaches. The district was then able to see how significantly that improved outcomes. And now they're up to 6. And it was just a shifting of resources and a shifting of thinking and funding, right? Money didn't magically reappear, but the district had a shift in their thinking because there was enough data and evidence to support that. So it's really cool that you kind of picked up on that. All righty, group 3. Or scenario 3, group 3, scenario 3.
I guess I can share for us.
Perfect.
We had a mixture of the two. We had to look at both of them and identify them if they were technical challenges or adaptive challenges. And we didn't really get to B. We spent most of our time on A, but it could be a technical challenge, and basically just sitting down and working out a schedule with everybody and identifying which of your teachers are the best suited for each content area and then making decisions based on that alone. But it's also an adaptive challenge because anytime you work with people, it doesn't just work. It's not easy. It's not easy just anytime you involve people in the discussion, then it's not easy to do that. And so you're going to have to make decisions that are going to upset some people and upset some other people. And one of the things that I brought into the scenario is we, at my district, changed up how we organize our co-teachers. And instead of content, specialties for co-teachers, we are now co-teachers follow their caseload. And so, and that was what we were begging for last year, but now that some co-teachers are not in the content that they're comfortable with, they're complaining. And so it's the complicated of, well, this is what you wanted, but then you got what you wanted and it's not what you thought it was, and now you're upset. And so there is the technical side of things where it was a technical problem to solve, but it created adaptive problems as a result. And so that's kind of what we talked about.
That's great, Matthew, and I like that you pointed that out. The first step always is to identify what type of problem it is, right? You have to say, is this technical, is this adaptive? Because that's going to help you think about how do I approach solving this problem. But that how those sometimes we talked about you can identify a solution, but then that solution, it morphs and it changes and it says, okay, but now it's turned into something that's more adaptive. And with this, that's where that linked teaming support really just, comes in, really helpful, or comes in as a great tool when thinking about these types of challenges. Thank you, Matthew, for sharing. All right, group 4.
Okay, so in group 4, we talked about a new evidence-based practice that we might be using in our district, but we were looking at it to fit a specific area. And after talking, we kind of all covered lots of different areas from preschool through high school. And so we decided to look at visual supports because out of all the evidence-based practices, we feel that visual supports is the best bang for your buck, no matter what you're doing. And it can address a lot of different areas, any academic area, behavior, different things like that. All right. So we decided that once we asked for the implementation of the evidence-based practice of visual supports in our district, then we would use a research-based observation tool such as the Alcott or the Teapot, something like that, to evaluate the classrooms. And so, and then after we evaluate the classrooms, then we would come back together and meet as a team and discuss that data and see, have we moved from not evidence practices in that area of visual supports to evidence practice of in that using that evidence-based practice of visual supports. And then, we've done that in my district for years now. And it really does help to use an observation tool that is specific for special education, just because it helps you focus on what you need to focus on, and you can really monitor what is happening in the classrooms. Not necessarily, you're not evaluating that teacher, you're evaluating that classroom and how it works and what is being used as far as evidence-based practices or just general things in that classroom. And it really helps you get your mind wrapped around how you can take that classroom and move it from one level to the next with fidelity.
And we focus, I'm sorry, and then using that data, because the observation tools that we use can be used in aggregate or like all of the classrooms and make for building implementation. Well, it can be used for coaching specifically for one teacher, the information, or it can be used by the building implementation team to see what needs to be focused on. And that one school at the building level. And then with the district, if you just use that, the data is used, again, in aggregate, like everyone together to see what trainings would be or follow-up would be good for the whole team or what other supports need to be provided at the district level.
Sounds like you guys had a great conversation. You're ready to be STSs alongside me. So I love, that, something that you guys, kind of said that I think, again, is so important. One thing that's really important is like once you have your evidence-based practice is saying, well, how are we going to make sure that this is what's happening in classrooms? And that's why you need that observation tool. And that I think it was Melinda, I think you said, our observation tool is not evaluative. It's always just that it's an observational tool so that you can go in and then like you kind of followed up with, Carrie, if you have a system for collecting that data and displaying that data, you can say we have these 8 practices, these 8 targets or whatever. When we did a school walkthrough, and what we observed is our teachers are doing great with practice 1 through 7, but they're really struggling with 8. And so now, as an instructional leader, this is where I need to focus at our next PLC, at our next training. This is where I got to provide some really direct coaching to my staff and to my teachers so that we can make sure that we're getting where we need to be. And so I really appreciate that you guys said that and picked up on that. And I love hearing that Carrie, that's something that you guys are doing. Linda, you guys are already doing. All right. Any other just like general thoughts, feedback, reactions, questions, anything?
I have a question.
Mhm.
What is so after transformation zone work kind of is implemented throughout the state of Kentucky, do we know what the next phase might look like, or is it we're just still trying to get everybody in a T-zone?
A great question with a really big answer. So,
Sorry.
so we had this. So we kind of have two. No, I love it. I love that you asked. So there's kind of like two things are happening, right? So from our work with SISEP, we are now in what is called targeted support, right? So we went from intensive support to targeted support as a state. And so now what we're doing is replicating that same sort of process within our regions and our districts, right? So we have some districts who have been through all 4 stages. They're killing it. They're doing great. Like I said earlier, they're scaling up and out. They're using implementation science beyond math. They're now using it with, like I said, behavior or reading. And so, our ultimate goal is that within every district, within every school, eventually you get to this space where your districts and your school teams are able to sort of do this on their own, to navigate their own ship, so to speak. They become so great at implementation science that it just impacts and changes sort of the way of their work. We've actually seen that in one of our other districts, like where, like, yeah, we did so good with this that now we're also using implementation science to do this, this, and this. We actually developed our own tool for this because we have all this research that said we needed this. And so that's how the work sort of gets, like, again, scaling up and scaling out. That's part of it, right? Is that in addition, like you said, we do want to eventually have every, region and every district utilizing and using this work. And so that's kind of, it's not a this or that. It's kind of like a both and kind of thing. Now, let's imagine that unicorns and rainbows, that unicorns come in on rainbows every Saturday. Like, it's great. It's awesome. Let's say that we get to where every district, every school is, just experts in implementation science. Our goal at that point would just be to support the maintenance of that, because we know that over time things change, and that linked teaming structure is, you're still going to need sports, even if you've got it, right? Even in our districts who are killing it, they're doing so good. Sometimes different needs, new barriers arise. And so, we would continue to think about, and support how we can solve those barriers and those problems. And, also we have the thing that a lot of our, districts love. We have this really awesome dashboard that takes all of those awesome pieces like fidelity, training, coaching, capacity assessment, all of those things that happen in a TZ, all of those supports, they get to keep those. They get to keep that dashboard so they can continue to monitor their progress and their goals. So does that kind of answer your question?
It absolutely did. Thank you so much for sharing
Okay.
that.
Yeah. Anything else? Alrighty, friends. Well, the next thing, there's a list of resources. And again, these are sort of built in throughout the PowerPoint, but some of the ones that I felt like you would probably want to go to first. The great thing about the SISEP website is, like, if you're just like kind of interested and you're like, do I want to call Shasta? Do I want to call my CERTAC? Then you can go to that SISEP AI Hub webpage, and it actually says start here. Right now, it's a rabbit hole, and if you're like me, you're gonna love it and be like, this is amazing and awesome. It is a big old rabbit hole, so you could easily spend just like hours looking at all of the different things. But at least it could kind of give you like an overview of what this work looks like. I encourage you, if you're really seriously interested, look at that stages piece, because we didn't talk about that, but that's a really important part of the work, and that mutual selection. So definitely check that out. And just to say too, if you guys have any additional questions, thoughts, if you're like, hey, how could systems work help with this? Or, is there a tool you could think of that might benefit, my district this? Reach out to me for sure. Give me a call. We can explore and talk about that together. If you just have if you want to connect with your CERTAC to see if this is something that your district might want to participate in, reach out to me, reach out to your CERTAC. I'm always happy to help. And yeah. All right. Thank you all so much. I'm done. And you're done hearing me talk. It's all you, Becca.
I'm not used to closing us out. If you would, please take the time today or Monday or Tuesday to fill out the Kentucky Leads survey. That link will never change. What happens is that our folks from HDI, they take your responses and then clear them out. And so that link that's available in SharePoint, it won't change. So you can always go to that link. Also, the resources that Shasta shared today, they're already available. And the link for our next meeting, which we're rescheduling, we're moving it to November 18th. That is available as well. I sent out an update to your calendars, although I've noticed that sometimes when, I just wanted to let you know, sometimes when you respond no, that I think it kicks you off the invite. I'm not sure if you all need to respond no to just that one meeting rather than that whole series. So just be careful when you do respond no. You can always respond yes, and if you're not here, it's, you know, it's okay. So does anybody have any questions about those types of things before we end?
I just want to make sure that, because I know how important these surveys are these the only surveys we're supposed to complete, or is there something else I'm missing?
We have had a lot lately, you're right. But for now, the Saturday satisfaction survey is the only one that we need to complete for now.
Okay, because I haven't,
go ahead.
I'm not sure I've completed any other surveys. That's why I just want to make sure I'm.
Oh, okay, Carrie, you should have. Will you email me and let me know that? And I don't know if the other links for the other survey that I think you need to fill out is relevant anymore.
Okay.
But I'm not sure about that. And someone in the chat had a question about our next meeting date. Let me try to find that. It is November 18th, not November 25th. No, not the 25th. We're meeting the 18th. And I sent a rescheduled update to your calendars. And again, if you do decline, make sure you're not declining the entire series, but just that one event, or you can just go ahead and accept it if you want to be careful about that. Does anyone have any other questions? If not, enjoy your Saturday, and I'll see you in a few weeks.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
What about December?